You should have received an email right before we got started with some materials and some information about tonight that you can have if you want to refer back to it. But tonight we're going to be focusing on credit and managing a business, and we have two of the top in the field presenting for us tonight. Cindy Snider is with Virginia Community Capital. She has the distinct pleasure of working with me. And I know that she's overexcited about that because I could see it in her face. And Cindy has been working in credit and financing for a number of years, and she can tell you more about her experience. And then following Cindy tonight is Carl Knoblock. Carl is the director of the Small Business Administration in the Roanoke District. So Carl is coming to us from Roanoke. So Carl, we are excited to have you join us. And Carl, and are you going to? I forgot to ask you, Carl. Are you sharing your own slides from your screen, or did you want me to do it?
Oh no, I thought you were doing it, so I didn't know that.
Okay. I can do it when it's time. Of course, there will be an extra fee for that.
I figured that much.
But thanks everybody. I hope the first 2 weeks have been great and informative. I know you've been getting a lot of emails. I just wanted to bring your attention to the email that I sent out a couple of days ago about not only attendance but keeping your video on during these sessions. You know, we're not meeting in person, and to keep this fair with everyone, that's the best way that we can know that everybody is paying attention and not having fun while you should be listening to this content, because we have great speakers over the coming weeks, and especially tonight. So we feel like you need to get the value from their content. Margie, Pam, is there anything that I am forgetting? Margie, you want to tell folks about the rebuild, especially for our existing business owners?
Sure. Rebuild Virginia, the governor has just made an announcement yesterday that he has expanded the program, and it has been expanded to all businesses rather than all small businesses with 10 million or less revenue, 250 employees, and that also includes nonprofits. So it's not just for the 8, they called it the Great 8 industries that were impacted with the executive orders that closed, 53 and 55, that closed a lot of the businesses like personal care and those types of things. So we've had a lot of training the last couple of days with regard to this. If you have applied previously, like in August, you may be getting an email that says that you may be eligible for additional funds. And again, it's based on your payroll, your utilities, and those types of things. So just stay tuned if you have any questions. If you do have to have been in business prior to March the 12th, 2020, and you would have to have some form of proof of revenue in 2019. So if you have questions, please feel free to give our office a call, and we're happy to work with you.
Okay, great. Just a quick reminder, just to keep confusion and disruption to a minimum, if you're not speaking, to please mute your devices, and that would be helpful. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to add on something that Margie said. I participated in that Zoom meeting this afternoon on the Rebuild Virginia. And for the Tazewell County folks that applied previously, if they also apply for county funding, we learned that if they apply for the county grant, that doesn't make them ineligible for the Rebuild Virginia grant. So I think that's very good. So Debbie, I think you applied for the Tazewell County grant, didn't you? Well, if you apply for Rebuild Virginia too, then that wouldn't make you ineligible for that. So that's a great thing.
Okay. Excuse me. Anything else? Anybody have any questions?
What was that picture we just saw?
Where?
And it was just a small picture at the bottom. Looked like, oh, I think it was, I'm not sure who it was.
Oh, I don't know.
I thought you were showing us something you shouldn't be.
Well, I wasn't planning on it. Let's put it that way. Okay, well, to get things started, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Snider at Virginia Community Capital. And Cindy, it's all yours.
Thank you. One housekeeping thing, Sandy, can you send Joey the link to this? He wants to watch it. And my email said, do not share my link. So I didn't want to break a rule right off the bat. So first thing I'd like to say is, wow, I'm so impressed that you guys are doing this during a pandemic. That's very impressive. I know I feel like there's days I'm barely making it through my day job. So to be participating in something like this after working all day is very impressive, and my hat's off to everyone that's participating. I don't know if Sandy had mentioned at the beginning and maybe another session, so I don't want to take up too much time talking about VCC, but I would like to mention there's a lot of talk we hear about SBA and the programs. Everyone's heard of the payroll protection plan and SBA's, and it seems to be topic of conversation lately. And so I just want to mention they do have two programs that were in place prior to the pandemic and that are still in place now. And one of them is their SBA.
I didn't hear anything about it.
That must have been okay. No news is good news.
We might have lost, somebody hadn't muted yet. SBA 7A program, which can be used for equipment, working capital, to help get a business started or help a business expand. And then one of their other programs, the SBA 504 program, I feel like is one of their best kept secrets. And it is, think of it primarily, this is how I think of it, for real estate purchases. If you're looking to buy a building, maybe if you've been renting or leasing a building and you want to consider buying that building or another building, they have super low rates on that program right now. And you can get into a building with as little as 10% down. And I just feel like that's a program that doesn't get talked about much, but it is a really good program. So you may want to check into that if that fits you, or if you know someone that may benefit from taking advantage of that. I've seen where businesses are leasing a building and they can buy a building and keep the same payment pretty much. So, you know, it makes sense to do that if you're not going to burden the business too much by increasing a payment. So just something for you to think about that I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of. So the way that this presentation is going to work is I'm going to go through some PowerPoints, but this is going to be interactive. And hopefully when Sandy sent you your initial packet, you noticed that there was a copy of a sample credit report in your packet. If you could be looking for that, because we're actually going to go through that credit report, and I'm going to ask each of you questions after we do that to get some input from you guys. So just be, if you can round that up, and I'm going to try to share it on my screen, but it might not be crystal clear. So if you can get that credit report in front of you, that'll be helpful, because we're going to work through that a little bit into the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And if you do have questions during my presentation, please put it in the chat. And if I don't catch it right away, I will make sure to answer them before I pass the baton over to Carl. You know, this worked during
Test.
It worked during the test, but yeah, let's try. Give me just a second and I'll switch back over and grab it again.
If you're judging tonight, you can take a few points off for technology for, okay?
Yes, yeah. Now I see why Carl was letting you handle it.
I can cue yours up real quick if you'd like.
You may have to. It's wanting to be very stubborn right now. Tell me if you get it up there before I do.
I got it. I get the points.
You win. Okay, we can go to the next. If you can go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so these are the things that we're going to talk about. The history of credit reporting, some good uses of your credit, where does your credit information come from? Like I mentioned, we're going to go over a sample credit report. What information's on there? How do you get a copy of your credit report? How do you dispute items that you may find that are incorrect on your credit report? And ways to improve your credit score. You can go to the next slide. And the reason that we dedicate a segment to this when we do business challenges is that your credit is very important when you are going, if you need to borrow money for your business. Let's say you came to us and you wanted to borrow money for your business. We're going to want to have a person sign on that loan. And so that means we're going to want a guarantor, and that means we're going to look at your credit. So not only that, and even if you weren't looking to borrow money for your business, it could affect many, many different aspects of your business. When you go to turn on utilities for your business, you want to rent a building or lease a building, all of those things, they're going to want to see your personal credit history. So that's why we set aside a segment of this, because you may be wondering, well, what does this have to do? What does my personal credit have to do with running a business? So what is your credit report? It's just basically a record. It's a history of how you have applied for credit, how you've paid your obligations in the past. You can go to the next slide. So the history of credit report, I think this is kind of interesting. I like history, but when you think about why do we even have credit reports and how did we get to where we are today? If you think back many, many years ago, prior to computers, some of us can remember that. If you wanted, let's say you needed to buy groceries and you didn't have the money, you would go to your local grocer and you would say, listen, Jim, I need groceries for my family today and I'll pay you on Friday. So he would keep a ledger of, it'd be Cindy owes $50, and then I would come in on Friday and I would pay for my groceries. Well, as our population grows and major population shifts after World War II, et cetera, let's say I'm not living in Southwest Virginia now. Now I've moved to California. Well, the grocer there is not going to know how I paid the grocer here. So they realized that they needed to establish like a reporting capacity so that credit history could follow you. And, that could be good or that could be bad. If you have not so hot credit, you may not want it to follow you, but it does definitely give you access to be able to, no matter where you are in the country, you're able to benefit from the credit history that you've established. So merchants started sharing that information, and then it's grown since then. You can go to the next slide. It gives you increased access to credit. You know how you could be in a department store now and you go up to the cash register and they say, we can save 10% if you open a credit card today. And you can pretty much instantly get approved for credit. It obviously the time, it just keeps getting faster and faster. And that credit goes with you. So you have the mobility of the credit, and it gives you greater access to products and services. You can go to the next slide. So how can my credit report be used? So I've raised two daughters. One's in her 20s and one's in her 30s, and I have drilled it into their head that you need to protect your credit just as though you would cash in your purse or your wallet. It's that important. It's that valuable. It can affect whether you get a job that you want. It can affect how much you're going to pay for your car insurance. It can affect cell phones, what you're going to pay to get a cell phone turned on. Can anyone else think of something else that may be affected by you having a good credit score or a bad credit score, where it may cost you more to gain access to something? Can anyone think of something that's not listed here? You can unmute or put it in chat. Oh, somebody just had their wisdom teeth pulled. That's not fun. I've been there.
I would say utilities. My wife and I moved up here about a year ago, and AEP ran a credit report, and I guess if it wasn't good enough, I would have to pay a certain charge or something. And so utilities would be a good one.
That's a really good example. A deposit. A lot of times I've seen deposits up to $1,000. I mean, if you're moving and you have other expenses, it's hard to put $1,000 and let somebody hold it for you to earn, for them to trust you to be able to turn on those utilities. That's a very good example. And that could be water, electric, cable. Let's see, home purchase, definitely. Energy, I guess that would go into, someone said energy, that could be like gas, if your business or your home had natural gas. And I'm going to just go down just a little bit further in the weeds with you. Think about it from this context. If you're wanting to move into a neighborhood because it has good schools and you're wanting to rent from, you find the perfect house and you want to rent so your kids can go to that good school because you've done your research and you know that's a good school. That landlord runs your credit and it's not good. You can't rent that house or that apartment. So it could even affect if you break it, you go down that far into it, it could affect what schools your children are able to go to. So it's extremely valuable asset, and you want to protect it, like I said, as closely as you would if it were cash. Someone else said in the chat that interest and financing rates, definitely. You go to buy a car or you go to buy that home, you're going to pay a higher interest rate because if your credit score is not high enough. So you can see all the ways that can chip away at your financial stability, if you haven't taken care of your credit. But if you're thinking in your mind, oh my, I haven't done that and I'm not so sure that my credit's good, we're going to talk about ways that you can start repairing that and get past that. So don't panic. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So where do the credit reporting agencies obtain your information? Anytime that you apply for credit, you put your address in there, you put where you work on that credit application. That would be the information that's being updated into the credit bureau. So they get it from consumers, which are you and me. Creditors, anyone that you owe money, they're reporting to the credit reporting agencies. Public records, if you have a collection or a judgment, that's going on there. Anytime that someone pulls your credit, you give them permission and they pull your credit, that's going to show up on there. And then you also have the ability to put a statement on there if there's a situation that you feel like maybe you lost your job or you were injured and you want to have a statement on there so that if someone pulled your credit, that they would kind of know maybe what had happened and why your credit wasn't exactly where it needed to be. And then there's the collection accounts. Those would report on there as well. You can go to the next slide. All right, so here's a question for you. I'm married, but I have different credit information than my husband. Would that be true or false? Go ahead and put in the chat what your guess would be, true or false. I won't say any names. I'll just put some guesses out there. Or you can unmute and tell me. All right, I've got some trues. I've got 3 trues. I'm married, but I have different credit information than my husband. That is true. Good, you guys all were correct on that. Your credit is your credit. Now, if I have a home loan with my husband, we may both, if you looked at both of our credit reports side by side, you would see that home loan on both of our credits. And there are times where if you and your spouse have done every credit report, you've done every credit transaction together where you may see that they almost look identical, but they are definitely separate and you do have your own separate credit report. So hopefully everyone's been able to find that sample credit report. And we're going to go through that. So this is, of course, just a generic, depending on which credit reporting agency you pulled your credit report from, there could be some difference in the format, but the information will be the same. So I want to go through that with you. And Sandy, if you go to the next slide, I think it's going to be in little bite-sized pieces. Yeah. Apologize, it's a little blurry, but that was why I was hoping you'd be able to get your hands on the actual document. So at the first section of your credit report, you're going to see any name that you have applied for credit under. Example, I have credit under my maiden name and I have credit under my married name. I go by Cynthia legally, but I sign my name Cindy. So there may be, I may have had credit in any variation of those names. Those are all tied to my social security number. And so it would show on there my address, current address. Now that current address is reported based on the last time that I applied for credit. So that's basically a self-reported information that would show up on there. And then any address that I've applied for credit before. Now, here's something for you to think about. When you access your credit report, if you see an address on there that you've never lived at, that's a red flag. That could be a sign that somebody has tried to apply for credit in your name and use an address, obviously, that you're not familiar with or associated with. So that would be something that you would want to check when you do pull your credit. Last reported employment, again, that's going to be where I have put that information on a credit application. That's how that information is getting on there. You can go to the next slide, Sandy. Okay, alerts. You can put an alert on, and you can even freeze your credit report. You've probably heard of that too. You can say, do not issue credit in my name without contacting me. And typically an alert like that will stay on your credit report for 90 days. A consumer statement will stay on there until you remove it. So just be aware of that. You wouldn't want something to stay on there that's no longer valid. And for the context of this credit report, we're going to pretend like we are in, let's say 2008, because I'm going to ask you some questions when we get to the end of it. So it would only make sense if we match our year with the dates that are reporting on this credit report. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so here's an example of how 3 different accounts would show up on your credit report. The first one is an electronics store. It shows your account number. It shows whose account, and it shows a J on there for whose account. Can anyone jump on the chat and tell me what you think a J stands for? Joint. Ding, ding, ding. You are the winner. That would be a joint account. That means we're equally responsible for that account. Date that it's opened, this one was opened in October of 2003. It tells you how many months that it's been reviewed. It shows date of last activity. It will tell you what the high credit is, and it will show a balance, and then it will show status. there's typically two different types of accounts that you're going to see reported, and this one is showing an R1. So jump in the chat and tell me what you think an R would stand for. We've got somebody on fire here. Revolving. Exactly. That means that it is like a credit card. Revolving means your payment is going to go up and down. It's going to depend on your balance. And in this instance, it shows there's a balance of 150 and there's $0 past due. Second one, bank name. We will just pretend like this is your local bank. And again, it has your account number. This is one of my favorite ones. Whose account? Or it's an A. Tell me what you think that would stand for. What type of account would show up as an A on there? This one's a hard one. No guesses? Authorized user. This one, you want to be very careful. If you make someone an authorized user on your account, that means they can charge anything they want on there, but they are not legally responsible for paying that debt. Why would you ever want to do an authorized user? Well, I have a story that I like to share about an authorized user, which would be my daughter. Send her to college, give her a credit card for emergencies. Here, I've made you an authorized user on this credit card, and you only use this for emergencies. Well, a few months in, start getting statements. What I consider an emergency and what she considers an emergency were two different things. So needless to say, we had to have a tough conversation. I can't remember if I gave her a second chance or not. I think after our conversation, she realized what I meant when I said emergency. So that would be one example. You might put a child on there. Another scenario that you might have would be if you have an employee working for you that you want to be able to go to purchase items, or maybe they travel, maybe there's in sales and they travel and they need to be able to pay for a hotel, rental car, etc. You may want to make them an authorized user. That's all well and good. There is there can be a purpose for them. You just need to be extra careful when you're doing that, because you're basically giving them a blank check. So in this instance, it looks like this person's an authorized user. There's no balance on there. And it is an I. It's an I account. So we had revolving just a minute ago. And so this one is an I. Does anyone want to jump in the chat and tell me what they think an I is? Individual. Perfect. Good job, Deborah. That means that it's an installment account. And when you think of installment, think of home loan, car loan. Those are two of the biggies. That means that your payment is the same every month. Got that set amount each month until it's paid off. And the last one we have here is auto finance company. This account is an I. That one's pretty easy. Individual. So we have a joint, we have authorized user, and we have individual. So this account is this person's individual account. They've had it for 24 months. They've got a high credit of, that's blurry to me, I think it's $7,500. We're $400 past due. It shows it's an I-5. Really, it should show that it's an I-2 because he's 2 months behind. But you want them to be ones on your status there, so that means that you're current. All right, you can go to the next slide, Sandy. All right, so here's some other things that may show up on your credit report. This particular person had a lien filed in March of 06 with Fulton City. It was for $42,789. It says that it was released on September 2007. He or she had a bankruptcy in May of 05. It says it was an individual bankruptcy. It was discharged. And at the time, he or she had $780 in assets and had $35,786 in liabilities. The next section there is collection accounts. Your very common thing that we see there are medical collections. And in this case, that's what you're looking at, is a hospital collection. Advice that I would give you on that is set up a payment plan. My youngest daughter, she wasn't paid for till she was 2. I used to joke and say they could come repossess her if I didn't keep making payments. But most hospitals will work with you and let you set up. I think I was paying $25 a month, but I paid it and I kept it off my credit report. Also, you want to be aware of those bills that you get. Say you have surgery. It always astounds me how you will have bills come in from labs, from doctor's office. It's like you get bills, and none of the bills were even where you had your surgery, but it's all these different organizations that were involved in the process will send you bills. If you can't just throw them away, they'll end up on your credit report. They'll end up hurting your credit. And we already talked about all the reasons that we want to take care of our credit. So I would encourage you to make payments if at all possible. They've always worked with me in times where I've had to make payments. And then I think this is the last part of the credit report that we're showing, and that's inquiries. Anytime that you give someone permission to pull your credit, it will show up on your credit report. Now, there's another place that you want to look when you look at your credit report. I talked to you about the address at the beginning. I said, if you see an address that you never lived there, that's a red flag. This is another red flag. If you see that there is a company that's pulled your credit that you've had no interaction with and you did not give them permission, red flag. You might want to check and make sure that someone has not stolen your identity or tried to steal your identity. You can go to the next slide, Sandy. Okay, so let's stop sharing screen if we can. Okay, so I'm going to go around the room and I want each of you all to put your banker hat on, okay? And this person that we just looked at their credit report has come to you, and we'll say it's a he wants to borrow $5,000. So Pam, I'm going to start with you. Would you give him $5,000? Would you loan him $5,000?
Not personally, but I work for the county, so the county on the county side, I might go give it to I'm kidding. $5,000, that's not that much money, but there were some red flags there. Hello?
So are you saying yes, you would, or no?
Is this a local bank? A local person? If it's someone I knew, if it's someone I knew and it's someone locally, probably yes.
Okay. Donald?
Just a quick reminder, competitors, you're supposed to have your video cameras on. There's a few that are not.
I can't remember who told me that they'd had their wisdom teeth taken out. I don't want to pick on him. Okay. I'll make sure not to pick on him. Donald, would you lend him $5,000?
Me personally, I wouldn't lend him $5,000.
If you were a banker, you work at the bank, this is your job, you do loans. He's come into your branch and he's asking you, will you loan me $5,000?
Depends on his credit, honestly. I just can't say that I would give him $5,000 without any information.
Okay, based on the information we just looked at on his credit report, would you say you needed more information?
I couldn't pull up the credit report. Just going by what you said, I believe he had a bankruptcy and he was 2 months behind on a payment. I wouldn't.
Okay. Lori, how about you? We all get to practice our unmute button during this.
No,
too.
I don't think I would. Basically because I think we don't see that he has the assets to even come close to covering the amount, even $5,000. So I think he had $780 in assets, and that's not a lot of money. Plus a lot of debt.
Yeah. Okay. Bill.
Yeah, I'd loan it to him if he could come up with 10,000 in collateral.
Okay. Fair enough. Margie, do you want to take a shot at it?
I don't think I would, just based on the credit report. If there were there was other supporting documentation that maybe he is working, he's no longer injured and all of those types of things, I might take it into consideration. But based on this, I don't think I would.
Okay. Amanda.
All right. I'm going to say no. I used to work for Wells Fargo as a personal banker, and I would say there was too much of a liability, but maybe, try to work out a secured loan or, I always like to give people a benefit of a doubt, but I would say no.
It's hard, isn't it? It is. Bobby.
I'm like Amanda. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I have a big heart, but my mind cannot grasp why someone who is 2 car payments behind is going to go in and apply for a loan anyway. They're going to pull your credit, so I would definitely say no.
Right. Okay. Going to the next screen here. Now, I don't know how to say Etheloma.
Etheloma. Everybody calls me Renee. It's a lot easier.
I almost cheated. I was going to say Renee, and I thought,
no, everybody does. It's much easier. I don't know. I think that I would probably need just a little more information because I think we're in 2008 now, and some of that was from 2007. So I don't know. I think I would want to know, is he working now? And so I don't know if I would or not.
Okay. That's fair enough. Joey, I see your comment. All right, Deborah.
I'm sort of like Renee. I would have to have a little bit more information, but the bankruptcy was in 2005. And, I'm sure his assets have increased by then, or I would hope so. But the red flag would be the 2 car payments behind. And like someone else said, why would you be asking if, unless he wants to make those 2 car payments? I don't know. I'd have to have more information.
Yeah. Okay. Melissa.
I think Melissa,
can you hear me?
I think she's been having some computer issues, and I believe that she had to switch devices. So I don't know if Melissa can hear or can speak.
All right, I'll try back. Let's see. Okay, John, I'm going to give you a pass. I can see that you're not, you're a little uncomfortable at the moment. So, Michael, I think that would be the only one that I have not heard from.
John did say no in the chat.
Michael, are you there?
Yes. Yeah, I am.
All right, you're his last hope. Are you going to be able to help him out?
I'm absolutely helping him out. Mostly because I'm going to need somebody to help me out like that one day. So I'm just going to go ahead and pay it forward now. And maybe the person who's paying it forward will, allot me some help later down the road.
I understand. Fair enough. Okay, so I like to say the reason that we did this exercise is now each of you know who you could go to borrow money from. Just kidding.
That's was a trick. I take back my answer.
I'm just kidding. That's not the reason. The reason that I like to do this exercise is when you are on the other side of the desk and you're the one making the decision, it puts a different perspective on it. And that helps you as the person that may one day need to go borrow money for your business. You're going to be able to think, now, wait a minute. I know when I was in that seat, what would have made me feel more comfortable? And some of you mentioned some really great ideas. Someone mentioned, it might have been Bill that said, well, if he's got a $10,000 piece of collateral, I'll loan him $5,000 on it. Others of you mentioned, well, I would want to know some more information. And really, if I said something like, well, he's been on his job for 25 years. He has a paid for vehicle that is worth $10,000, and he wants to use that title to borrow the money. So there are ways that you can mitigate if you don't have stellar credit, but now that you've been on that other side of that desk, you can see now how you're going to need to help build your case and bring extra things to the table if there are some credit issues. So thank you all for playing along. I know it puts you on the spot, and it can be kind of, you feel bad when you're not giving the person the money. And as a loan officer, we deal with this type of thing daily, where we really want to help somebody, but sometimes giving someone a loan when they're not financially able to pay it back, you're really not helping them. You're really setting them up for failure. So I like to do that exercise. I think it gives some good perspective. So I'm going to give you some more tips here. If you all are like me, before I did this, opt out, I would get offers of credit cards in the mail all the time. 0%, open a credit card, we'll give you 0% for 12 months. I mean, my mailbox would be full of those. Which, if you think about it, if your mailbox is sitting full of credit card offers, that's really just, it could be a risk to your credit and your identity, because somebody could pick one of those out of your mailbox and try to apply for credit. I'm not saying they would succeed, but you never know. They might. So what I did is I went on to this opt-out pre-screen. You can call or you can go to the website and you can opt out of those offers. So you would not get those in the mail anymore. Now, I will say this, if you ever want to reverse it, you are able to reverse it. Because I remember at one point, I wanted to get a credit card that would offer me a 0% for 12 months. And so I went in and opted back in and was able to get, some offers to where I could take advantage of one of those. But it's just, again, it's another way to protect your credit and, keep more control over what type of offers are coming out to you. And you can go to the next screen, Sandy. All right, here's another question. My credit report contains information about my recent divorce. Is this true or false? All right, I've got one true, one false. Anybody want to break the tie? My credit report contains information about my recent divorce. That would be false. Now, I'm going to add to that, if I'm looking at a credit report, there are times when you can kind of tell that maybe at one point there was a spouse, because there may be some joint credit report showing up on there. There have been times where you have someone apply for credit and they'll say, well, that was because of that bankruptcy was because of my divorce. Obviously, if you've got two incomes going towards debt and you split up, there's a chance that could affect your credit. And that's a common thing that can happen. But your individual credit report would not specifically say that you had gone through a divorce. You can go to the next slide. What other information is not in your credit report? Race, religion, medical history, political affiliation, checking or savings account. I have had people before think, well, I have a savings account, so that's helping my credit. No, it doesn't. If you bounce a check and the bank gets a judgment against you for bouncing that check, that's going to show up on your credit report. But just having a checking or savings account in of itself will not. And any other information that's not related to your credit will not show up on your credit report. You can go to the next slide. All right, so we've talked a lot about credit reports. How can you get a copy of your credit report? It's not to the business that annual credit report or get your free credit. There used to be a commercial on where it had like a little jingle on there, and it would say free credit report, and you get on there and it ends up they make you pay. The annualcreditreport.com is where you are able to access each of the 3 credit reporting agencies free one time per year. So you can pull one Equifax, one Experian, and one TransUnion. You can purchase them at any time also outside of that, but you are entitled to get one free per year. Also, if you're declined for credit, you're able to access that. Now, the reason that I'm telling you about annualcreditreport.com, I know that there's other sites that you can access your credit report, and I know that there's some credit card agencies that are even allowing you to see your credit report. The reason that I want you to be aware of annualcreditreport.com is if you find something on your credit report that is incorrect, you can dispute it right there, right then on this website. Instead of sending a certified letter to the creditor and disputing it that way, you can dispute it right there on annualcreditreport.com. And the organization or the creditor has a certain amount of time. They have got to provide proof you owe that debt or it gets removed from your credit report. So you're putting that burden on the credit reporting agency, and that clock starts ticking on that creditor at the time that you dispute it. And you can dispute if a collection's on there. It's just a really efficient way to dispute items. So that's why I want to make sure that you're aware that annualcreditreport.com, it is free. You're entitled to one of each of those 3 credit reports per year. And it will ask you questions that only you would know the answers to. And sometimes it's even hard to remember the answers to them because it'll ask you, what street were you associated with 20 years ago? But that's how it protects you from other people accessing your credit report. Does anyone have any questions about any of that? Okay, I'll pause at the end, of course, too, in case you have questions. Here's another question. I don't need to check my credit report because I pay my bills on time. Is that true or false? Jump in the chat and tell me what you think. False. That is correct. We've already talked about a lot of different situations that could happen where your credit could be compromised, and we know how important our credit is. So you definitely want to keep check on it. And I'm going to tell you about another company that I use that helps me. It's going to obviously identify fraud. You're going to make sure that what's reported on there is accurate. And then if you've got credit, if your credit is not where you want it to be, it's a great way for you to monitor it and watch it increase as you make changes. You can go to the next slide. It is up to the credit reporting agency to verify information before they put it on my report. True or false? Anyone? Correct. It is false. Obviously, they need to do due diligence, but it's kind of like when you balance your checkbook or when you check your balance online with your bank. You always want to make sure that you are having your eyes on your money. And again, think of your credit as valuable as your money is in your wallet. So you want to check it on occasion to make sure that there's not anything going on. I think the next slide is going to tell us a way to do that. Not yet. Okay. Disputing items. I talked about the best way to do that, and I feel like that is doing that on annualcreditreport.com. Obviously, you could go directly to the creditor, and if you can try that, if you get let's say you get a medical bill in the mail, you want to call that doctor's office and try to work out a payment plan before it gets onto your credit report. But once it's onto your credit report, I recommend doing it on annualcreditreport.com because you have a record of the fact that you're disputing it, and it puts the burden now on the creditor. You can go to the next slide. What is a credit score? So basically, your credit score is just a 3-digit number that creditors use to assess the likelihood that you will pay your debts on time. Think of it kind of like a GPA in school. You have that kind of accumulated grade. That's how a credit score works. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the one section I want to talk about, how to find out what your score is. And as I mentioned, there's companies that are offering you your credit score. I think Discover Card does it, and I know there's others that do it, that will allow you access to your credit score. I like Credit Karma because I can access my credit score on there, but I also, if I set up an account with them, it's free. If an account gets opened in my name, I get an email. If an account were to get close to the limit, I get an email. If an account closes, I get an email. So I get credit monitoring while also having access to my credit score. I've used this Credit Karma for years and years and years. I've seen it be beneficial to other people. I know one of my coworkers at where I worked before said she got an email from Credit Karma that this credit card was almost at its limit, and it was a credit card she hadn't even been using. Somebody had that credit card and was running up her credit, and she wouldn't have known if she hadn't gotten that notification from Credit Karma. So I highly recommend it. It will allow you to see your score, and it will tell you some different things that you could do to improve your score. I will warn you, there's a lot of advertisements on there of credit card companies trying to get you to open accounts. So don't get caught in that trap of opening cards if you don't actually need a credit card. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so I worked in the car business for 20 years before I got into business lending. And so I was in finance. And so I would see credit reports all day, every day. That's what I did. And I a lot of times couldn't figure out why a score would be what it would be. When I would look at the credit report, I just couldn't figure out the method to the madness or the algorithms to it. I used to joke and say that it was kind of like the Oz on the Wizard of Oz behind a curtain, and he was back there like, doing the levers to come up with these scores. Then I discovered this format here, and this puts a little more understanding and method to the madness on a credit score. And I feel like this is some good news mixed in this as well, because if your credit is not where you want it to be, 35% of that is based on the payment history of how you have paid your debts over the last 2 years. Okay. So that's big in my mind. If I have credit issues and maybe I didn't take care of my credit like I should, maybe I went through a divorce, maybe, it could be any number. We all know there could be any number of things. My credit, 35% of my score is affected on how I paid my credit in the last 2 years. So meaning starting today, if I start making improvements with how I'm paying my credit, I can affect my credit score. 35% of that credit score is based on how I've paid. So over the course of the next 2 years, or even 6 months, I've seen substantial improvements in credit scores in as little as 6 months. One of the big things is if you are over your limit on a credit card, even if you're over your limit $30, that is killing your credit score. Get that down as quickly as possible, because it's a computer and it's just calculating all these formulas. So something is, you're probably thinking, well, I'm just $30 over or $20 over my limit. The computer doesn't care. It just knows you're over your limit. So something like that could really hurt your credit score. 30% of your credit score is based on how much is owed to creditors. And that's where you get into, is all your credit cards, are they at the limit, or are you keeping those, let's say, below 50%? You don't want to max out the access, all the lines of all the credit cards that you have. So 30% of it is going to be affected by how much you owe creditors. Length of credit history. This one, it comes into play when you think about, you hear people say, don't close credit cards, or I used to hear that, don't close a credit card. Just, even though it's a zero balance, don't close it. Well, why would they say that? And I used to use the example of my first credit card was a Sears card, and it was in 1984. And I follow that by saying, don't do the math, because yes, I'm old, but that was my first credit card. Well, as long as I had that credit card, even if I had a zero balance on it, my credit history went back to 1984. Of course, I don't have that Sears card now, but that's one of the benefits of credit cards. I'm not saying that you would want to carry a balance on a credit card, and you do not want to have a credit card that has an annual fee. There's too many out there that don't have annual fees. But the reason that you wouldn't want to close a credit card is, especially if it's one of the first ones that you got, is it is what's keeping your credit history depth there, and that's helping you by 15%. The next one is 10% is the amount of new credit. That is, are you just out opening up credit cards like crazy? You don't want to do that. That's why I'm very careful when I'm in a department store and you go up to the register and they're like, you want to save 10% today if you open a credit card. If you just do that every once in a while, that's fine. But if you go on a shopping trip and you open one at every department store you go to, that's going to hurt your credit score. And then lastly is types of credit in use. This formula likes to see a balance of revolving and installment. So you don't want to just see credit card debt. They want to see that you've been able to make a set payment every month. So think of like a car loan or ultimately a home loan. But it likes to see a nice mix. And I do think that it knows if you are doing those high interest rate finance companies. It can see, how that loan is structured, and those do not help your credit score. And I've had people say, well, I went to one of those places and opened up a loan there so that I could build credit. Not the best way to build credit. I did hear somebody mention, it might have been Margie, mentioned about a secured loan. You could, if you're just starting out and don't have established credit, or you're wanting to rebuild your credit, you could go to your bank or your credit union and see if they would let you have a secured credit card. And that would mean you would open up a credit card with, say, $500, and you put $500 in a savings account there, and they hold that until they see that you're using that credit card and you're paying it every month. And then maybe after a year, they'll let you get that cash that you've secured it with let you have that back, and then you would have access to that credit. Because credit cards are important when you think about the fact that being able to reserve a hotel, rent a car, if you should have an emergency. I mean, I know it's easy for us to think credit cards are bad, but if you manage them well, they can be, especially for your business, that could be 30 days worth of cash flow for you. If you manage that credit card, pay it off every month, and it's helping you build credit as well and maintain credit. You can go to the next slide, Sandy. Do you need a credit score above 700 to get a preferred interest rate? True or false? answer on that one is going to be depends. Depends on the lender. Some lenders don't do their rate based on interest or based on your credit score. The lender I worked at before, they had a fixed rate. Everybody got the same rate. Whether you were 800 or, they had a minimum that you couldn't be below, but it does depend on the lender would be the answer to that question. That one's kind of a trick question. You can go to the next slide, Sandy. So how can I improve my credit score? First, look at it. See what it looks like. I've worked with people that were like, I don't even want to look at it. I just know it's terrible. And then they look at it and they're like, wow, that wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Or sometimes they look at it and they're like, what in the world? I didn't know that was on there. And especially if you're going to apply for a loan, look at your credit before you go and apply for that loan. There's nothing worse than sitting across from a loan officer and they say, well, what's this collection? And you're like, what are you talking about? I didn't know that was on there. Because now you know how you can get things corrected and disputed and off of your credit report. You want to do that before you need it, before you need that loan. Consider limiting the number of credit cards that you use, because really the reason behind that too is you could end up missing one and end up missing a payment, and you don't want to do that. I talked about reducing inquiries by limiting new credit applications. Oh, and this is a biggie. Avoid companies who claim they can improve your score for a fee. There's no magic wand to this. They can't do anything that you can't do for yourself for free. And I've encountered people who have paid hundreds of dollars to companies for them to fix their credit. And of course they didn't fix it. They just took their money. So, you know how to do it now. So you should be able to do that on your own. You can go to the next one. That might have been it. Oh, let's say this is my last questions. All right. So how long does a consumer owe borrowed money? And the answer automatically shows up until it's paid, settled, or bankrupt. Now that's how long do you owe it? How long can the derogatory info be reported by the credit bureau? And I'm running out of time, Sandy, so I'll let you go ahead and put the answer on there. 7 years and 180 days. And how long can a creditor pursue the consumer in the court system to force payment? This one's interesting. Virginia can go after you for 20 years, Tennessee for 10. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so just, I know I'm sounding like a broken record of how valuable your credit is and how you want to take care of it. Check it regularly, keep your credit card balances low or pay them off monthly, which is what I recommend. Pay them on time every month and protect your credit. And I think that's it, Sandy. We'll go to questions now.
Cindy?
Yes.
Hey, Cindy. This is Pam. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I do have a question about how often do you think you should check your credit score? I know you don't want to be excessive about it, but.
Yeah, I would say minimum once a year, but I use Credit Karma, so I know nothing's happening with my credit, because if it was, I'd get an email from them. They would tell me. But it's still, I would say at least once a year.
Hey, Cindy, if I buy that car warranty, will it show up on my credit? Because they keep calling me every day. I just have to hang up on them.
Don't buy the warranty. I can tell you that.
Okay.
I use Credit Karma as well, and they send you out a notice every month, that you can check that your scores have changed or that they've upgraded or whatever. So you can check it every month free through Credit Karma.
Yeah.
Well, I was sort of asking. I have Credit Karma too, and I'm sort of asking for everyone else so they would know as well. I kind of got obsessed with it for a while, just wanting to see if I could get my score up. So
Right.
It's kind of it was kind of a challenge. So I was kind of obsessed with it for a little bit, but
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that. That my daughter, when she gets like, if she gets a notification her credit score has gone up, she'll call me and say, "What's your credit score?" I'm like, "I don't know. I haven't checked it later." Well, see what it is, because she wants hers to be higher than mine, and my husband's the same way. It can be kind of a competitive thing too, which is it's a good competitive thing because you want them to be aware of it for sure.
Renee?
Yes, ma'am. Cindy, can you explain the DUNS number? I went on and did a little reading, and I do have a DUNS number, but I felt like if I paid them money, that would somehow, I don't know, increase or make it better what they would say about me. Is that a company that reports on you? Should I buy what it was they were trying to sell?
I'm just going to give you my opinion, not expert opinion. I would not pay for anything that they offer. I mean, we're not looking at it. If you came to us for a business loan, now Carl may know more about it than I do, but I don't see any reason that you would want to pay them. Unless there's some benefits to something else that doesn't have to do with credit that I'm not aware of.
This is Carl. This is Carl. The DUNS number, if you're working a lot with suppliers to build product in that, the DUNS number becomes relevant. Also, you can get your DUNS number free by going to SBA.gov and going through government contracting and get your DUNS number free with no costs. The only reason they want to give you the money, charge you, is because then they can track your payment schedules and everything else. So it's just basically data analytics.
Yeah, I did have a DUNS number. I went in and looked, but I can't remember right offhand. It was something else they were trying to sell, and I don't know. I took issue with it because I thought they were like a reporting agency, and I don't have it in front of me, so I don't remember what it was, but that they were selling, but it was not the DUNS number. It was your ability to find out what they're telling people about you.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I have to pay you to know what you're telling other people, and it was something else.
It deals with your suppliers. That's where it goes to, because the suppliers will typically ask you for your DUNS number if you're working with raw materials and that, and then they will do a check with that company to see if there's any outstanding issues related to your company. So that's where it really comes into play. But if you're not doing a lot with raw materials and things like that, it's pretty much useless.
I think we had to have the DUNS number on the rebuild application as well, didn't we, Margie?
If you are applying for a lot of government grants, you would need a DUNS number. Right?
Well, thanks, Cindy. You did a great job. You've been Zoom bombed in the back. I saw him go by and tell him I said hello. But thanks so much. And Carl, I will bring up your slides.
Okay, fair enough.
One moment, please.
Yeah, the one thing I want to point out what Cindy talked about, and I love when she does the exercise, would you give this loan or not? Because we deal with this every day where people are saying, if I'm just given the chance, I know I can pay it back. And it's like, no, that's not the way it works. So people feel it's an entitlement, and it's not. It's money. I mean, remember, the lending institution's in the business to make money also, just like you are. And I'll give you a perfect case example. I had, when the economic collapse happened in 2010, I had a trailer manufacturer, and he basically contacted the congressional senators and said that, SBA is not helping us. They're causing my distributors all kinds of problems. So literally had a big meeting with all these, the politicals and this company. He sat here and he talked about it. They had 100 distributors that basically were being hurt by our programs and all that because they couldn't get loans and that. So as he got done, he looked at me, and everybody and the congressionals were asking me questions, and I sat here and I said, before we get into this, I said, I want to ask the president of this company one question. I said, how many of them would you actually give a loan to today? And the room totally went quiet. And then after a while, he said one. I said, okay, that answers it. Congressionals were totally happy. They walked out and said, you made your point. So understand, that's the way it works.
Thank you. Any other questions before Cindy flies off? Renee, your view's gone. Okay, Carl, I'm going to bring you up.
Okay. Nice job, Cindy.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah. With the hair, right? COVID hair.
Yes, I love the COVID hair. Love it.
So anyway, today we're going to talk about managing business. And I kind of make this very general to talk about all different types of industries. And this one's going to be kind of different because we're dealing with something very unique, as we were just talking about COVID here, the pandemic. So it's kind of really changed how businesses have to look at themselves today. So what was 8 months ago, the norm is no longer the norm. And so that's kind of how we're going to look at this as we go through this. So one, we'll talk about you. We'll talk about human capital, insurance, marketing and sales, logistics, manufacturers, finances, IT, cyber, and disaster. And with this broken down, Margie's on this meeting, which she does a great job at the SBDC, but they have a tool called Growth Wheel that can kind of target these specific areas to kind of help you if you're having issues and challenges with trying to figure out how to grow your organization. Next slide. Okay, so this is you. Now, all of you, if you take a hard look at yourself, these are the three things really that you need as a foundation to be successful in business. And people say, really? I said, yeah. I always need somebody to have a creative idea, and because that's what gets things going. And you may be the most creative person in the world, and that's great. But the one thing I've learned with very creative people, typically they can't get the business off the ground because their mind's always changing. So they never can take anything to completion. Then we have the people at risk, and they'll risk everything on anything. And eventually they go out, they have more downfalls than wins. So that's an ingredient, though, that we need. We need somebody that's willing to take risks. What we find is a lot of people aren't willing to go take that risk. You know, the classic is, are you willing to put your home up? And if you're not, then, you know, don't go looking for money. That's what it comes down to. You know, do you believe in yourself enough to go after it? And then the last one's manager. Manager basically grows the company. And I always ask people, you know, think really hard. You can do all of these for periods of times. And typically you do as the individual business owner. But think about where your strength is, because your strength will dictate how your business actually moves. And so a classic example is, if you say you're a great manager, then I tell you go open franchises, because the model's already developed. They just need a good manager to make it grow. So it's kind of understanding what you look like determines how you will look in the future when you move forward. Next slide, Sandy. And like I said, as I go through this, ask any questions anytime. I have no problem with that. So please don't be afraid to connect. Anyway, human capital, when you start hiring people, and the business challenge, this one, Sandy, they have to hire one person or anything like that?
Yes, for a existing business, they have to hire an additional employee. For a startup, they are considered the employee.
Okay. So this is always a really important thing. So think about it. You're just going to add one employee. And the most critical thing I always tell people is they will make or break your company. And people look at me like, what? And I said, because you get one bad employee when you're really small, it will collapse your company, because you're spending all your time and energy trying to get that person in the right mindset. And if you get rid of them and you haven't documented well, then you're in the court system paying ungodly fees, trying to justify why you let this person go. So it's kind of understanding it. And like I said, when you're a small company, chemistry is the most important asset. It's not about technical. You can teach technical. It is chemistry. When you have great chemistry, you can do unbelievable things in a company. So it's something to think about when you're looking to hire people. And then, is this person a people person? Not only externally with your customers, but also internally with your team members, because that is an important ingredient. Lots of times we forget about that. Somebody may be a great charmer on the outside, but totally inside is totally unfriendly. And you need that total person to be complete on both sides. Next slide, Sandy. So I always tell people, make sure you have a job description, because the job description, one, sends a very clear direction of why you're hiring that person, for them to do what you're asking them to do. Number two is, if there's ever a issue where you have to go to court in that, the first thing they're going to ask you is, do you have a job description? The other thing is an employee manual. If you don't have an employee manual, you automatically lose in the court of law. And so I always stress to people, you have to have something there for requirements in that. And lots of times people make this mistake. Well, it's a family member. I said, it doesn't matter. I said, if you don't have these things in place, you'll be amazed how your family will actually turn on you. So never lose sight of that. And then, like I said, now with the employee manual, with telework and everything, people have to look, if you have an existing employee manual, about the changes you happen to do for the pandemic that you have to take into account. What happens if all of a sudden your team member says, I don't feel comfortable coming in, and it's because of a health condition. They don't have to tell you what the health condition is. What are you going to do? How are you going to address that? These are things you have to start thinking about now that has totally changed since the pandemic's come into existence. Next slide. These first two are really super critical. Confidentiality agreements and non-compete agreements. If you don't ever get employees to sign these, you're just asking for trouble down the road, because if you have secrets that you've shared with them, or even the customers you work with, and you don't have this agreement, they can go right after it, or they can start using what you have. And if you try to press a lawsuit, you're not going to be able to really gain anything from it. You'll spend a lot of dollars that get you nothing in return. The non-compete, it's basically 2 years to just basically say they can't go after your customers. That just kind of keeps them at bay. And after 2 years, if they want to wait that long and start going after your client base, by the time you've already changed probably your relationships with those people. So these are things you think about. But these two agreements are super critical as you start your business, or if you're already in existence. The other one's the American Disabilities Act, the ADA. Especially if you're opening something where consumers are coming in. If you go and take an existing building, especially a historical building, those become living nightmares to try to comply with ADA. A case in point, there was a historical home, and they were going to make it into a restaurant, and they literally pushed the issue that they had to have ADA compliant bathroom. And where the bathroom was at the time, if they went to try to make ADA compliant, it was under what they called a critical point of the building that it would literally collapse the building. And so they tried to get a variance out of it, and they couldn't. They said, you're just going to have to figure it. So we're talking huge dollars to engineer around that issue just to have the ADA compliant bathroom. So please be aware of that. Those of you that are going to be in the entertainment tourism, all that. Here with the recent regulations that Virginia put out, the first ones in the country related to the pandemic, what you have to have in your facility, not only for your employees, but also for the consumers. And it's very gray and it's not clear, a lot of confusion. But you have to figure ways to comply it. And those are extra costs that 8 months ago you weren't calculating into your formula that today you have to take into account and make sure you can get the products to you because of the demand in the field. I can honestly say now, though, because I was on a call with, very interesting call with the admiral who actually oversaw getting the hospitals, the assisted living, everything with all the personal protective equipment. So that came from ventilators to respirators to everything else. And literally, it was amazing the story he was telling of trying to get this all to happen when everybody was screaming for something. And right now, basically, to put perspective with just respirators, we have basically 200 million respirators sitting ready to be used. So we actually could start selling to the world. And that's basically been done within the United States of companies stepping up and producing. And so it's kind of a thing to be aware of, but please do not lose sight of this with the pandemic that Virginia does have a regulation in place that you have to comply with when it comes to OSHA related to the pandemic. Next slide, Sandy. Okay, so big thing is always look to hire good talent. If you have a high turnover rate, you need to take a hard look at your organization and say why. You know, lots of times the real convenient excuse is I don't pay enough. I hate to tell you, there are people that stay that don't get paid a whole lot just because they love what's happening within the company. There's other perks that keep them there. So and it's just the atmosphere. So please don't lose sight of that, to understand that. And then when you are small, what's your contingency if somebody calls off sick? You know, lots of times that ends up being you that has to step up and fill in. And with the COVID, what's your contingency on all of a sudden one of your employees just says, I have it. So what do you do in your operation? Because they were at work. So now what is your challenges with the customers you serve and everything else? These are contingencies you need to already have thought out so you know how to deal with it in today's market. And then, like I said, training is the key, educating, on-the-job training checklists. These are all things that sits here and makes it very clear you know what you're doing and your employees or team members know what you're doing. Next slide, Sandy. Insurance. People always talk about that. And when companies start having hard times, this is the thing I always fear. This is kind of the first things they start canceling. And then, as I always say, Murphy's Law, the worst thing happens, and then they're really in trouble. So classic is required unemployment, workers' compensation, and in some states, not in Virginia, but other states, disability is a requirement. So if you grow, these are things you have to take into account if you go into working in other states like Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, those type things. Next slide. So with insurance, you're assessing the risk. That's what insurance carriers are doing. They're trying to determine that. You know, don't just go to the person you typically buy insurance from for your car, your home, and things like that. Bring in different people, especially those that are focused in the business industry, and get their quotes and what they offer and bring to you. It's called a business owner's policy, a package. So they're offering you all kinds of things. And you want that good licensed agent that can work. And I know with the web today, you can get quotes online and everything else, but it's still nice, especially in the rural communities and things like that, to have that local person because it's a relationship when you're especially having challenges. somebody right there local that can serve you quickly and efficiently. Next slide, Sandy. So these are some of the insurance that people talk about: the general liability over your operation, or product liability if you have product, and and that can even be the product that you create, like if you're creating foods and things like that, something unique. So like if you're using flowers or something in part of your foods and that. Professional liability, if you're a consulting firm, things like that, where you're offering advice and those type things. And then if you have the commercial property, typically when you sign a lease or you're buying a property, you typically got to have insurance to cover that property in case of fire, disasters, those type things. Next slide, Sandy. This one has really been an education, because there was a lot of companies that had business interruption, and they thought it was going to work for them in the pandemic, and it didn't. And so this had a huge economic impact. Right now, there's lawsuits actually going on related to this, because the way some of them were worded, technically they were covered under the pandemic. So these are going on, but when you're a part of that, that's a cost. You have to basically get a lawyer lined up, and you have to go in there in court of law, and you're going against an insurance company. So that already tells you what the dollars are going to be like. So these are things you got to be aware of. Cybersecurity, especially when you're a small business. Later we'll be talking about whether you're going to have servers or be in the cloud. I will tell you, highly recommend be in the cloud. Don't have your own server. The thing is, this is becoming a huge issue, especially when you're working with suppliers or bigger companies. They're literally challenging you on what is your cybersecurity program and things like that. And cybersecurity insurance is very sketchy. And so really do your homework, because it is not apples to apples. It is literally apples to oranges. What different insurance providers are offering. So please read it, because a lot of companies, and I'm talking major companies, who had cybersecurity insurance thought they were covered, and then found out that they weren't, because they didn't read the clause all the way through. Flood insurance is a common one, and you may say you're not in a flood area, but as I always use the example, if a tree falls and blocks a creek and it backs up and you're caught in it, that's a flood. And so you need to really kind of keep these things in thought. Where you're located, could the potential possibility happen that you could get flooded? So you have to be aware of that. And people say, well, I'm not in a 1,000-year plain. I said, it doesn't matter in today's world. In Pennsylvania, they had a rule that basically you couldn't, if a tree fell, you couldn't cut it. So literally it would build up over the years, and what it did, it created a natural dam, and then it would back up, and with heavy rains, and then areas would flood out that should never flood out. And there was nothing they could do. And if you cut the tree, it was a $25,000 fine. So it's just the way the rules were written. So things to be aware of. And then sometimes, especially when you're going after funding, especially if you're don't have a potentially a lot of collateral in that, they may ask you to take life insurance on the owner, so to cover the loan amount. So in case, heaven forbid, you pass away, there's a way it gets paid off. So just don't be shocked if you get asked that question if you go after potential financing. Next. Okay. This is really important to understand, and a lot of people don't pay attention to this. It's not only your business, where you're at, pre-startup, growth, mature. It's also understanding the industry, the industrial sector you're involved in, your NICS code. That's really important. And then how's the global market look? Because I'm sorry, you're competing with the global market anymore. There's no, it's just here in the local Southwest Virginia. It's not. You're global. I mean, you're trying to get tourism, if that's your thing. Guess what? Every place else in the country and around the world is trying to get tourists. So you're competing against the world for people. So these are things you have to think about. And now with the pandemic, it's kind of changed that model because people now are looking more local for their travel. So tourism is a totally different beast where before you were looking for people to stay overnight. Now it may just be day travelers that just come in for the day and go back. So it's a totally different revenue stream that you have to think about. So these are things you kind of have to be aware of when you're looking at this. And the one thing is, understand when you are in growth, that doesn't mean you're necessarily busy. It just means that the company is really growing. And typically I say it's double-digit growth. That's growth. But just being busy, I can show you lots of companies that are busy, but they're not growing. So realize that. Next slide. As I stated, we're a global economy. Never lose sight of that. And the pandemic is really reinforcing that, making it very clear to us how much we are tied to the rest of the world when it comes to everything. And it's having a ripple effect every which way from every major industry that you look at, and it's impacting us at our local levels. Next slide. Okay, so our markets, target markets, you know, the competition, and remember, there's two types of competition. There's a direct competitor, somebody you would know, and then an indirect competitor. So trying to make it simple, a direct competitor is, I want to go out and get a hamburger. Okay, you can immediately think of the different types of hamburger places. It could be a local business that has the greatest hamburgers in the world. It could be the fast food, McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's. It could be Five Guys. It could be a Red Robin. The list goes on for those direct. But all of a sudden, they're all busy, and somebody says, okay, I'll take a chicken sandwich instead. Well, now that changes. Yes, some of those offer chicken sandwiches, but now you have Chick-fil-A, you have Popeyes, so you bring in a whole different set. Those are indirect competitors that can influence where that money is spent. So these are things you have to think about when you're looking at your challenges where you're dealing with. Your price points. I think this is where a lot of people make the mistakes. They don't price themselves correctly. And when you don't, you can be very busy, be making no money. And the thing is understanding, what is the customer willing to pay? That's what it always comes down to, I tell people. What is the customer willing to pay at the end of the day? One of my businesses, my standard price was $5,000 a day. That was my standard price. It got paid. You know, if somebody wanted me to do a rush job, it was $10,000 a day. They paid it. If somebody wanted me to do it on a holiday, it was $25,000. I only had one customer ever asked for that. So at least I knew where the line was at, because I didn't want my holiday disrupted. So I made it so if somebody was willing to pay for it, great. But I was going to do everything I can not to sacrifice that holiday. So those are things you look at when you're trying to deal with this. Also, if you're going to do a trademark or a copyright, USPTO, United States Patent Trade Office, has a great website to guide you and work through you. They have great webinars to assist you with understanding how to do that. So you understand what the costs are and everything else when you're looking at that. And the big thing is, you know, later on, people talk about the business plan and everything, but it all comes back from marketing. How well you do your marketing determines how well your business plan looks. So having that good market strategy today and tomorrow. Next slide. Okay, so right here, this is what the pandemic's done. It has totally changed us into the electronic age. Faster than people thought. You know, people are thinking 5 to 10 years from now, and these are just a handful. There's others. But the thing is that you have to learn now to be thinking that way. Even if you're local, you have to be thinking this way, because if people are doing pickup, they're not calling. They're going on the web to place their order and get it. That's the way they look at things. So you have to understand that when you're looking at your business, especially starting it, this has to be at the forefront now. I already have to be thinking about this. I can't just say I'll do it later. It doesn't work that way anymore. You have to have this as an intricate part of your business. The other thing is there's a lot of electronics, websites, and social media and everything. And I tell people, if you do your homework really well about understanding your target audience, you know which one of these social media platforms to use. I see everybody hopping on everything, and I'm going, why? I said, how many hits do you get hit on Twitter? Well, none. And then why do you have the Twitter account? You know, you're wasting energy. Do it where you can get your impact for your customers, because at the end of the day, that's what pays the bills. It's not how many social media platforms you're on. Next slide. And then we have our traditional, and guess what? Those now are almost like anything that's paper or anything, nobody wants to touch it. So you go and give a business card, people are leery of taking your business card anymore because of COVID. So these are things you kind of have to think about now. And then, like I said, before, those of you that are in the arts and that, going to do shows and that, now we're virtual. Our shows are virtual. And so it's a totally different mindset of how we do these things. So these are different strategies that I know that Margie's team's done a really good job of creating some nice workshops, webinars on trying to do this. And so is Sandy with her new knowledge, with excellent tools about trying to get you to start thinking about that. That is the new way business is done. Next slide. So in sales, basically that's the people that are generating deals, because that's what pays the bills. So, you know, Google Analytics, they offer those free workshops to teach you how to do these things. You know, understanding your forecasting, your pricing. You know, where could you take your business in other sectors besides your current? Like, you know, they just talked about Etsy on the stock market, and they said 11% of their sales was basically face masks. You know, that was 11% of their money, just focusing on face masks. And so you kind of have to understand that there's a brief opportunity with the face mask. Now it's a saturated market. Everybody has them. So you caught your bubble for a little way. You caught the wave, but the wave now is mature. So you have to just say, okay, it's time for me to move on to something else. And so these are things you think about when you're looking at sector opportunities, new products. Think about the distilleries and that who stepped up to make hand sanitizers and that. They changed themselves just to keep product moving, which made them look very positive, how they were helping communities and things like that. But at the same time, it made people sit here and say, you know, later, once this resolves itself, I want to make sure I want to go back and thank them, and by purchasing product from them, things like that. So these are things you have to look at. And customer complaints, remember, if you're doing Yelp or anything, remember, there are people that are actually paid to write negative things about you. And so you have to be prepared to understand how you counter those negative attacks. And, you know, sometimes it's not immediately saying, oh, I'm so sorry and everything. It's looking at everything that was brought up and addressing it in a proactive way, so people know that you're actually reading about it and trying to address it. You know, we're going to always have the rare complaint. I can tell you every day I get a complaint that nobody answers the phone in our office. I hear that every day. And the first question I ask them, did you leave a message? No. Okay, I really can't help you if you don't leave a message. So that's kind of the thing I look at. What they're wanting is somebody to be waiting for them to be able to pick up that phone when they call and answer right at that moment in time. So these are things you kind of have to be aware of when people are complaining. It may not be necessarily you, it's just they don't like your setup. Next slide. Right here, I tell people you should be doing this every quarter. You will have your regular customers, and you look at those customers, and I always say, who's your most profitable? Those are the ones you take care of. That's who you put your energy into. The ones that are least profitable, don't be afraid to let them go. Every quarter when I have my businesses, I always looked at it. And when I brought on a new customer that was going to make me more revenue, I basically helped my least profitable and I pushed them off to one of my competitors. Just because the fact is I needed space, capacity, and I needed revenue. And so they weren't going to pay increased pricing, which they should have. I was doing them a favor over the years, but it was at a point that now I had to move on to keep the company moving forward in a profitable way. So these are things you have to think about. It's nothing personal. As I always tell people, it's just business. It is literally just business. Next slide, Sandy. With this pandemic, one of the key components is suppliers, especially if you're dealing with overseas. I'm going to give you a case in point example. Last week, I got called by a gentleman. He sits here, he says, I'm supposed to supply hand sanitizers to the Commonwealth of Virginia. I said, okay. And I said, why are you calling us? Because we're the federal. He says, I want to lodge a complaint. I said, okay. And I said, what's the issue? He says, the product's supposed to be here today and it's still in China. And I said, okay. And having done business in China, I asked him a couple of questions. And what he did is he thought like what we do in the United States. And I said, you don't understand how the Chinese do business. So he just basically placed the order and thought that they were going to deliver it. And they said, no, they don't deliver it. He has to deliver it. So then I asked him a couple of questions. I said, okay, is it a container? Is it half a container? How many pallets is it? He says, well, I'm not sure. And I said, you don't even know the size, so I can't even figure out what your costing is. I said, are you working with a broker? What's a broker? So here's somebody who landed a contract and has a second order and doesn't even know their supply chain and what all the challenges that are going with it. And that's why I try to stress to people, please understand your suppliers and do not put all your money into one supplier. The fourth bullet down, as I always tell people, don't be afraid to give 75% of your business to one supplier and 25% to another that does the same thing. So when times of struggle hit, you got somebody as a backup to help you out through the situation. I'll use the example because I used to deal in polymers a lot. Like these hurricanes, my raw material was coming from Louisiana and Texas. And so I had to think of bringing rail cars up ahead of the hurricane just to have them posted so I can have them ready. Even though I wasn't ready, I had to have it because they were going to shut down operations. And these are things you have to think about when you're trying to line it. So I had multiple suppliers so I could make sure I can meet my demand. And then I had to have the trucking firms that could unload from those rail cars to get me the material. So these are things you're looking at all the time. What are the payment terms? Like the gentleman for China says, oh, I have them on a letter of credit. I said, that's great. And he says, well, you know, I want to file a complaint. I said, China doesn't care. You know, and you file the complaint in the United States, they're going to tell you can't do anything because it's actually in China. Different laws, different requirements. So, you know, that you just lost on that deal. And then the other thing is, do you need warehousing? You know, it's a cost center. Now with the pandemic, people before were very big, and as I highlighted here, JIT, just in time, make it and ship it out the door. Now people are taking a step back and saying, you know, I think I need a hybrid. I need to have some inventory, and I still need just in time. So it's kind of changed how we look at things with this pandemic. So that's something else you have to think about from what you used to do traditionally. But this is a key component with this pandemic is the logistics. The logistics has probably been one of the biggest downfalls with a lot of companies, from trying to get their materials to actually getting their products shipped out. I just had a company that called me, and they're going like gangbusters. They're having a record year, but they're barely making any more money than they did last year. And the reason is they used to use the postal service for their deliveries, but the postal service was delivering everything so late, they had to go to the competitors, and they're paying 2 to 3 times the amount dollar-wise for shipping. And so their profits going away. And so these are things they're having to refigure now. How do they recapture that back? And so they're making changes of like actually manufacturing their own products, some of their product lines in that now. So a totally different mindset happening to keep themselves profitable. Next slide, Sandy. The other thing is and I can't stress this enough, and I'm talking about manufacturing, and it's also in your operations, if you have workforce, is absentees, especially with the pandemic. It is going to totally disrupt your operation, and you have to really have it thought out how you're going to deal with that. So please be aware of that as you move forward, that you have to take this into account, because this could make or break your business, and it's already happened to several companies through this process. So be aware of that. Next slide. Your finances, you'll always be dealing with this. The key three, as I tell you, if you're going to business and you're not really strong in financing, is understand your cash flow, your balance sheet, and your income statement. The reason I bring this up is you'll say, oh, I have an accountant. I can't tell you how many cases I've dealt with where people that don't understand this, and the accountant is not as I call honest, and it's basically cooking the books and taking money from you, and you don't even know it. And so fraud happens. The IRS gets involved, but guess what? It's not the accountant that's going down. It's you. You're the one that's going to pay the penalties. You're the one that's going to have to deal with it, possibly going to prison and everything else. So please understand the basics so you can keep your accountant honest through the process. Next slide. And then when we talk about the IT cyber, the one thing I'm only going to stress, be looking to the cloud. Don't use your servers, because it's so easy to hack into systems anymore, especially if you have employees that are also using those servers and everything. So it's something you have to be aware of. And if you're going into federal government contracting, you have to have a cybersecurity program now. That's one of the requirements if you want to do government contracting. So they've already written that, and the higher the security, the more stringent it is. So please be aware of that as you move forward. Next slide. Disasters, as I said, we have our natural man-made, and the pandemic kind of really changed how we look at disasters as we look at this. And the one thing is I cannot stress enough is that every one of these disasters, you should already have it thought out. What is your contingency? Like, so if my one polymer plant that I had, if it blew up, I already had agreements with my competitors to actually do the work for us with my most profitable customers. So I could keep my business going and keep my employees paying them through the time period until we got ourselves back up again. So these are things you have to think about, that it can happen, and you should always be thinking about, how do I deal with that? Next slide. And then stressing your outside team doesn't have to be necessarily working for you. It's just your support players, a very good accountant or bookkeeper, your insurance representative. Today, you need some type of IT cyber working relationship to make sure you have the proper tools that you need. Potentially, if you're hiring employees, a human capital firm to review your policies and that to make sure everything's going. You may or may not need a lawyer, depending on what you do. And then having that lender relationship. Everybody always talks about the relationship with lenders. and this is the way I stress it, is with all the mergers and acquisitions going on, the lender you're talking to today may not be the lender you're talking to tomorrow. So it's about keeping that relationship. And then when you do need something, they're there ready to assist you because they already understand you and know what you've been doing. So don't lose sight of that relationship. I can say nothing but kudos with Virginia Community Capital with the payroll protection plan, how they really stepped up. They did a fantastic job, helped out a lot of businesses that weren't getting support from their own lending institution. So I commend them for that. And the other thing is the other programs that they use that they have funding for, whether it's USDA, SBA, or whatever, and use those to help those small businesses that are trying to launch themselves forward. So I just wanted to put that kudos to them for everything they've done. Next slide. And then these are just some business resources. Like I said, it's Google. Hit it. You'll get everything you want. You go to SBA.gov, you go to SBDC. All of them just have so many resources, you go on overload. So please understand that there's actually more information than you need. And sometimes it's scary because you get so wrapped up and you say, oh my gosh, this is so complicated. Running a business is very simple. It's just common sense. If you have common sense, you can do okay. You just have to be willing to listen to people, find a good mentor, and you can create yourself with success. Next slide. Build that strong team. As I said earlier, chemistry is the key, whether it's an internal team or external. Strong team, chemistry, the teamwork, critical component. Always operate with integrity and make sure you always address the team needs. Understand what they need to be successful. Next one. Two things you cannot control. Time. We can never capture time back. So understand that. And number two, we all need luck. And so it's okay to be lucky. And so just understand those are two things you can't account for, and they do happen. Next slide, Sandy. And last but not least, remember, you're one hook from a disaster when you're a small business. And so you always have to be thinking ahead. So do not lose sight of that as you go forward with that. And with that, does anybody have any questions?
Well, don't everybody speak at one time. We can't handle it. I did warn you that these two presenters tonight had lots of experience and they're in the industry. So I hope you took lots of notes.
And Sandy has my information. So if you want to follow up, don't be afraid to ask. Margie has my information, but Margie's a great asset. Sandy's a great asset. So
Carl's contact information is on the mentor list that you got the first night that I sent you. So you have that, and it's also up in that link of materials that I sent you this evening. Lori has a question.
I have a question for Carl, actually. Thank you so much. You have provided some great information tonight. I appreciate you so much for being a part of this. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the time and effort that it takes to address negative comments, whether you receive those in your company or you receive, and I understand, if you receive that online, a lot of times it's going to take a full-time person to handle those social medias and your online marketing. But talk a little bit about that if you don't mind. I mean, what is the best way to address that?
The biggest thing that I tell people, lots of times when people get a negative comment, they kind of bury their head in the sand. Like, it's just a one-off. And I always tell people, the quicker you respond to it, people know that you're in tune and that you're active on your website or on your social media platform. And you're basically addressing the concern. Yeah, somebody may say, if it's food, it tasted terrible. Oh, guess what? not everybody likes the same food, and we just have to accept it. Or they didn't like the temperature of the soup. You know, it was too cold. Well, wait a sec, somebody else tasted it and it burnt their tongue. So, you know, you just kind of have to be aware that it's how people want to put the comment, and you just have to kind of be that customer friendly. Appreciate you notifying. We've sat here and reviewed our processes, and for future, please don't hesitate to come back and give us a second chance to see if the things have changed for you.
Carl, he's frozen and he can't get up. I think we lost Carl. Technology is great when it's working. I hopefully he'll come back. But one of the things I wanted to mention was the importance of marketing. And next week, that is what our focus will be. And Brittany Clark-Clayman and Michelle Workman with Virginia Tourism Corporation will be leading that session on marketing. That's one of my favorite topics is marketing. So I hope you come with lots of questions.
Can I tell a quick story, Sandy?
Yeah.
Because he mentioned Yelp and Yelp reviews. So I was just going to share this funny story for everybody. So my son was probably in about the 4th grade, and he was had a cell phone, and he was on the school bus, and he was on his way he was either going to Roanoke or Gatlinburg. I can't remember which trip it was. So he and his little guy friends, they were on the bus, and they were searching the Yelp reviews for the restaurant where they were going to eat. And it was not good. And my son was about to lose it. So here they are, little elementary school kids searching the Yelp reviews. And they were just like, this is not good.
Carl, did you have a good trip?
Yeah, as they said, I went into cyberspace someplace.
Yeah.
So with the high winds and that. But it's really, the most positive remarks are always how quickly you respond. Because most people know that there's always going to be a one-off. And, you know, when somebody's targeting you, the comments are pretty consistent. People can see that it's pretty much the same person that's trying to harass. And you can actually get it addressed if that person's removed and blocked from your site. So if they're targeting you.
Okay,
And
so just stay engaged with them, basically. Just engage.
Yeah, I'm telling you, the quicker you respond, people sit there and say, they know what they're doing. They, you know, I have to give them a chance. You know, this is just somebody, and they responded back quickly to it and said, you know, it's not what you think it is.
Okay.
Any other questions for Carl before we sign off?
Sandy, this is Pam. I just wanted to thank Carl. Great information as always, and I learned something every week. So thank you, Carl.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for everything you guys are doing. I give you nothing but kudos for opening.
Well,
please understand, this is actually, even though it's a very challenging time to open a business, it's actually a very good time to open a business, because it's you kind of are at the what I call infancy stage of the new way business is done. So if you're creative and understand how this new wave is working, you're going to do very well.
Great. Just a few housekeeping. Is everybody working on their business plans? Carl can tell you doing it the night before it's due is not the way to do it.
Am I reviewing them this time?
No, you're not.
Okay.
Not unless you want to. But,
well, you know, if you want me to, let me know.
But please be working on those, and also be thinking about your business pitch that will be done on the last night. And you definitely know how to get up with me if you have any questions. But I guess that's it, unless anybody. But Pam's got something.
Well, I just wanted to add that I always learn something every week, and tonight I learned if I worked for a bank, I would be fired tomorrow for making a bad loan. But it's with good intentions, because I just want to help everybody. There you go.
You know, Carl had mentioned too about having your plan and being prepared. And today at our final session of our Refocus and Rebuild, we actually had the CFO of Food City and the president of W3 Consulting talking about how having a resiliency plan in place helped them through this pandemic and to be being prepared. And that's available on Virginia Community Capital's Facebook page and also on our YouTube channel. But it's really some pertinent information. And I don't care if you have one employee or if you have 1,000 employees, or in Food City's case, they have 17,000 employees. Having that plan and knowing if something happens, or being prepared in case something happens, is will help you and will help you get through that. And it's very important. So I will say that. But I'll see everybody same time, same place next week. And I'm glad now everybody didn't fly off. I was afraid today that I was going to end up in Kansas with some of the wind that came through here. But everybody be safe and trick or treat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sandy.